The following documentary deals with subjects that may upset certain members in the audience, as it presents possible interpretations of historic facts. The conclusions presented here are a matter of opinion. The evidence is real. In the late 15th and early 16th centuries, there lived a multifaceted artist called Leonardo da Vinci. His work traced out hidden roads and left behind crucial keys, barely visible secrets in the dark language of symbols. This rebelliousness would lead Leonardo to the edge of irreverence. To retrace Leonardo's steps, we must take a most curious path. A path full of signs that allow us to understand his pagan devotion. A biblical figure marks the course. A saint with contradictory meanings that, visible or invisible, is present in almost all of Da Vinci's work. Sometimes he's in the foreground, and sometimes he's just barely suggested in a gesture or a symbol.
John the Baptist, enigmatic or intentionally sidelined figure. Why are the Holy Scriptures so reticent about the man who announced Jesus' advent? Why did Leonardo put him in almost all his work? What was he trying to say by his presence? The messages in Leonardo's paintings shout out to us from across the centuries. They are living forms, thriving with the energy that only exists in art. Leonardo always wanted to know a little more. The fire of knowledge lit up his mind and filled his sleepless nights. It's thanks to restless and brave men like Leonardo that history was beginning to emerge from the shadows of the Inquisition. Due to his talent, Leonardo was a rebel. In a way, he could not help it. How can someone with the wings of a falcon act like a dove?
The year was 1452. In a modest village in the Italian prairies, an illegitimate son was born to a humble peasant and a young clerk. The child would be a master of art and science. Well ahead of his time, he would astonish the world. In his way, he would be a prophet. A man with his own rules, codes, and style.
Europe at that time was plagued by sects, satanic rituals and witchcraft. Heir to a Middle Ages just barely over, heaven and hell seemed to be fighting it out in every corner. In the name of God, the Holy Inquisition imposed fire and torment on anyone even vaguely suspected of heresy. Its ardor instilled fear into every corner of Europe. Its word was indisputable, and no one was above suspicion. So much heresy had to be paid for, with blood.
Of course, so much repression meant continuous and equally exaggerated opposition. Satanic cults, obscene rites, and disdain for God were the perfect setting for the secret societies of the day. These secret sects were ripe for anything diabolic: sexual excess, animal sacrifice, hypnotic trance, and above all, the desecration of the divine.
The crowded cities of Europe secretly housed a large number of pagan ceremonies. Although there were slight variations, these rituals had a common theme:
They all aimed to renounce the Christian faith, to manifest infidel fervour, and give way to supernatural powers. Perhaps subconsciously, all these heretics had a sole aim: to regain the lost pleasures of the forbidden, to free the body, to unleash the imagination. It's not hard to imagine Leonardo investigating these rituals, perhaps even participating in them anonymously, studying people's strange drives. If the Christian church forbade the sensual pleasures, who then would permit them? The Antichrist?
Although its participants were relentlessly persecuted and annihilated, the Black Mass was a very common ritual. Let's imagine Leonardo observing some of the ceremonies born out of the anti-faith. The Black Eucharist host stood out against the flames of the torches. The Messiah was offended, insulted. His name was desecrated and his image disgraced. Women presided over some of the ceremonies in response to the closed sexism of Catholicism. The desperate shrieks of the priestess rose above the stench of the sacrifice beasts, the smell of blood and sex. Blasphemy, orgies, and the sole aim, to invoke the Black Angel.
Skulls, horns, black cats, snakes. Most heretical sects worshipped any symbol that offended the Christian God. This included the apocryphal Gospels, the unofficial account of Christianity's events. For no apparent reason, these accounts were excluded from the Bible. And here lies a key point. For the Catholic Church and the Inquisition, the range of heresies stretched from the most radically demonic sects to the offshoots of Christianity, though not blasphemous or even anti-Christian, did not follow official Vatican dogma. One of these sects followed John the Baptist. Why did people worship John the Baptist? And why was it considered heretical to do so? Was Leonardo a follower of John the Baptist? One thing's for certain, Leonardo was fascinated by the prophet of the desert. But first, let's take a good look at this figure who so obsessed Leonardo.
A strange character in the Gospels, a loner, isolated. Though in the Bible, it is almost as if John the Baptist belonged to another story. In the pagan versions of the Gospels, however, his role is much more active. He was born miraculously to a woman of 80. John the Baptist baptized Jesus, yet he chose to follow his own path and he had his own followers. He did not join the Messiah's group. When the Catholic Church became powerful, the followers of John the Baptist were persecuted like the followers of the Antichrist. The recurring presence of John the Baptist in Leonardo's work gives us a glimpse into the darker side of the master's beliefs.
Leonardo's work often contained secret codes that alluded to the artist's deepest convictions. Symbols which, had they been detected, would have been deemed heretical and damnable. Marks and gestures subtle enough to elude the accusing eye of the Inquisition. Signs that today sparkle from aged canvases.
Leonardo painted Saint John the Baptist from 1513 to 1516. There is no record indicating that he was commissioned to do this piece or that he received any compensation for it. He must have made it out of a personal desire to pay homage to that saint. Leonardo put many subtle messages in the painting that suggest his sympathy for the sect loyal to John the Baptist.
John's image is captivating. He's an aesthetic and solitary character who gave his life for a Messiah who practically ignored him. When John was arrested by King Herod, he patiently waited for Jesus, and Jesus never came. And yet Jesus of Nazareth did not begin to preach until after John was dead. What was the connection between them?
According to the Holy Scripture, both met when Jesus, who had felt his prophetic calling growing inside, was still searching for his path. In the desert of Jordan, Jesus went to see John the Baptist, listen to him, and undergo a public baptism.
Herod's soldiers, Samaritans, Levites from Jerusalem, and even Arabs stopped there on their camels, all gathered to hear the voice clamoring in the desert. Jesus and John, two young prophets face to face, the penetrating look of one on the unwavering eyes of the other. And hanging above the crowd was a question that would live on in the confines of heresy. Who was the true Messiah?
John the Baptist died tragically at the hands of Herod. Hypnotized by Salome's dance, King Herod found himself prisoner to his promise. "Ask for whatever you wish," he told the dancer. "I want the head of John on a silver platter," she replied. John the Baptist, pointing his index finger to the sky as depicted by Leonardo da Vinci, means oath and blessing. In a word, it alludes to God. This is not at all strange, considering that John the Baptist is a saint. But when this gesture, linked to other symbols, begins to appear in all of Leonardo's work, even in paintings that have no relation to John the Baptist, its presence takes on other meanings. Some of them not at all orthodox.
The question is not at all ingenious, and we will repeat it. Why was Leonardo so determined to evoke John the Baptist in work that bore no relation to him? Let's take a look at the real importance that Leonardo gave John the Baptist. Very artfully, Leonardo rendered all traces of his sacrilege invisible. But through his work, there is a disturbing doubt. What if John were in fact greater than Jesus? What if the world had misidentified God? The Madonna of the Rocks is one of the pieces that made Leonardo one of the most important artists in the world. At first glance, there is nothing strange about it. But let's delve into its mysteries to try and prove once again that confusion has a tight grip on messages that we still cannot decipher. The scene is set during the time when Joseph and Mary are fleeing to Egypt with Jesus to escape Herod, who has given the order to kill all newborn boys under 2 years old. The painting depicts the Virgin Mary, the baby Jesus, John the Baptist, also as a baby, and the angel, Uriel.
Here the Virgin Mary, Saint John the Baptist, and Jesus, the small children, and an angel are portrayed in a cave. Thus, the name of the painting, the Virgin of the Rocks. A very young-looking Mary, in a dark blue dress, is seated at the center of the composition.
The choice of characters and setting may not seem striking. The mystery begins when we ask ourselves, which one of the two children is Jesus? Let's look carefully at the hands and the attitude and position of the bodies. If we look at these with the religious standards of the time in mind, we will find some very confusing details.
The figures relate through gazes, gestures, symbolic hand language, and body posture. Each of these elements has a different meaning that varies depending on their position. Following these codes, it is possible to determine who of the two children is Jesus in Leonardo's work.
In pictorial work from the Renaissance, hands were often almost as expressive as faces. In Christian figures particularly, there was a strict codification about the language of hands. This fact offers certain certainties about the Madonna of the Rocks, certainties that unfortunately only serve to confirm the impossibility of understanding the piece as a whole.
The index and middle finger of the hand of the child on the right are extended in a gesture that indicates that he is blessing the other. It follows that the child on the right is Jesus, given the attitude of the other child, hands joined in an expression of adoration and acceptance. It follows, then, that the child on the left is John the Baptist.
According to the language of the hands, Jesus is blessing John the Baptist, who is receiving the blessing reverently. This scene would not be particularly striking if it were not for the way that the painter relates the characters he depicts.
Strangely enough, John the Baptist is protected by Mary, who looks at him lovingly. The other female figure is Uriel. According to Catholic liturgy, she is John the Baptist's guardian angel. In this painting, Uriel is behind Jesus. Thus, Leonardo castled the figures, placing John the Baptist in Jesus' natural place, and Jesus where we should expect John the Baptist. Furthermore, Mary's hand seems to be threatening Jesus, whom she should be protecting.
John with Mary and Jesus with Uriel. Why such confusion of names and roles? Furthermore, Uriel is pointing at what would seem to be the chosen one, at John. But who really was the chosen one? This changing of places culminates with further details.
There is a convention in the position of saints in religious art, a convention that respects position hierarchies. The image of Jesus should be above all other characters, or at the center of the scene, since he was the Messiah. Physically, no one can be above the Savior, because this would imply that there is someone more important than him. Yet, in Leonardo's work, John the Baptist is above Jesus.
Every Renaissance artist employed the physical distribution of the characters to underline hierarchy and importance. Leonardo left nothing to chance. Carelessness was not a possibility. Why then did he intentionally generate this confusion? And what was he trying to say?
All of the details of this painting point towards a protagonist, the baby Saint John the Baptist. John is above Jesus. The angel Uriel points at John as the chosen one. Mary protects John and not Jesus, whom she seems to be holding back with a gesture of her left hand. John the Baptist's central role in The Virgin of the Rocks is a stance that challenges the strict religious tenets of the day. This was not a minor detail, but, in the eyes of the Catholic Church, a true sacrilege. Its message would be, then, that John the Baptist is above Jesus. John is the chosen one. A further detail cannot escape our analysis. Jesus is naked and fragile, coldly placed on the ground, whereas John appears clothed.
The reaction of the Convent of Immaculate Conception, the order that commissioned the altarpiece, was strange. When they saw it, they had reservations. They refused to pay Leonardo for the work, claiming that it was too confused. Leonardo, in turn, threatened to paint an identical one for other clients. There is only one other way to analyze this piece. The child next to Mary is in fact Jesus, and the child next to Archangel Uriel is John the Baptist. This interpretation is in keeping with classic liturgy. But if this were the case, the heresy would be still worse. Jesus would be kneeling adoringly before John the Baptist, who would be blessing him.
In the end, Leonardo painted another version of The Virgin of the Rocks, but 20 years after the first, supposedly to clarify the confusion around the children and to position them more in agreement with the conventions of the day. Nevertheless, the new version of the painting did not settle the problem, and once again, Leonardo swapped the characters.
The secret societies to which Leonardo belonged held that originally Jesus was a disciple of John, but that the two became rivals. Later, the apostles, and particularly Paul, consolidated Jesus' position as the true Messiah. It is known that John was widely respected and popular, and that his followers founded their own church, a church that is never mentioned in the official texts. Can we really believe that it is coincidence that the Gospels trimmed down the story of John the Baptist, given how important he was in Palestine at the time?
In the Gospels, it is clear that the relation between John and Jesus was not at all cordial. Indeed, it was quite distant, if not tense. John recognized Jesus as the Savior, but later, in jail, he waited in vain for Jesus to visit him, and his faith wavered. When asked about John, Jesus said he was an old wineskin, unfit to hold new wine, meaning the Word of God. John was an ascetic, whereas Jesus accepted the offerings befitting a Son of God. The Christian Church persecuted followers of John's doctrine until their almost complete extinction. These followers included Templars and other sects true to John. All were soon accused of heresy.
How can one avoid thinking about Jesus' tragic death when seeing his image as a baby? The man who preached love was tortured until he almost lost judgment and rebuked God the Father for forsaking him. How can one avoid thinking about John the Baptist, locked away in the darkness for years and finally decapitated at the request of a loose woman? Perhaps their rivalry contains the seeds for human misunderstanding, which caused them both death and suffering. Perhaps that's precisely what Leonardo wanted to convey in this piece: the misunderstanding, confusion, and contradictions of a cult that imposed its will through blood and suffering.
Underground sects dedicated to John the Baptist, Mary Magdalene, and others were relentlessly persecuted by the Inquisition. Members of these groups were forced into hiding, but many kept the faith and, in order to maintain the rituals, formed secret societies. These societies brought together a disparate group of personalities. They sometimes included members of the Catholic Church, influential figures from the worlds of politics and the military, aristocrats and artists. In the 15th century, these sects were hidden away in the passageways of faith, leaving subtle signals by which they could be recognized. Signals that rang from the riskiest of places, even from the altars of the dominant church, like a raised finger saying, "It wasn't like that."
The gesture of John, a recurring symbol in Leonardo's work. A gesture that expresses faith and ideology, unlikely friendships, and a secret acknowledgement of certain profane sects that survived in the shadows. Even though it might have meant being burnt at the stake, Leonardo used this symbol time and again, with boundless provocation. What led Leonardo da Vinci to put heretical messages in holy works of art?
At the end of the 19th century, the pages of an old manuscript were found amongst the dusty relics of Europe. A peculiar sign indicated that the writings found in Paris were by the same person as other similar writings found in London, Vienna and Milan. This sign, a feverish script written from right to left, became the unmistakable mark of a restless and enigmatic being. When the experts held a mirror to these dusty pages, they did not expect to find anything more than another insignificant antique. But these documents brought to light revolutionary knowledge that would have changed the course of history and religion. The author named himself frequently by writing Io, Leonardo da Vinci.
When these 500 pages were deciphered, the 1,000 facets of Leonardo da Vinci shone forth as if from a prism. Each facet of his personality gave a new surprise. This was when it became clear that far from being the official artist of Christianity, Leonardo's versions of sacred events were full of pagan symbology, even in works commissioned by the Church itself. From these pages, the nuances of history's most important personality became clear. An artist conceived almost by accident in a furtive encounter between Caterina, a poor peasant girl, and Piero da Vinci, a young aristocrat.
Caterina was 16. Her unusual pastoral beauty gave her a charm that Piero da Vinci could not resist. But all the lad was after was a brief fling. At 24, Piero was following his family's wishes: become a clerk and marry a girl of his class. When Caterina told him that she was pregnant, all Piero said was that he was to marry Albiera Amadoro, a 12-year-old girl whose parents were also clerks. At 10:30 on the night of April 15, 1452, Caterina gave birth to a son by candlelight. For the next 5 years, the boy grew up at her side. He drew sustenance from his mother's simple village and was ignored by his father, who lived in one of the most lavish mansions in Vinci.
Albiera, however, the wife of Leonardo's father, didn't have children and grew deeply fond of this restless, blonde-haired young peasant. Leonardo never forgot his first mother's caresses. Her memory stayed with him as long as he lived. But it was Albiera that was his true mother, his beloved, La Mamma. She taught him how to write, gave him love, and for as long as she was able, an education. But one day, young Leonardo's world came crashing down again. At the age of 24, Albiera died in childbirth. Leonardo was just 11 years old. The memory of his two mothers stayed with him throughout his life. He took after Caterina with his unbridled spirit, his inexhaustible fantasies, and his love of nature. He remembered Albiera when pursuing answers to his endless problems or concentrating on his abundant research.
His life was marked by 2 women, 2 absences. Leonardo lost 2 mothers in his first 11 years. For the rest of his life, he would use paint and brush to look for the female figure whom he had lost so early on. This loss deeply marked the painter of virgins and ladies. Much of Leonardo's work depicts the search for the female figure, the pain of loss, the sublimated image of his 2 absent mothers. He shows families without fathers, lonely children with lost looks in their eyes.
What memories of Leonardo's idyllic world reflect the presence of 2 mothers taking care of him? A world dominated by women, or perhaps dominated by the abyss left in their absence, an absence he tried to cover with his art. In his brief but intense pictorial work, the female figures come to life with a pure and overflowing energy, a vital and luminous energy that came from Leonardo's own hand.
At the time when Da Vinci was composing heavenly works of art dedicated to idealized women, virgins and saints, the church had a very different view on the role of women. At that time, the Holy Inquisition was circulating the bloodiest publication in its history, The Witch's Hammer. It described the danger of priestesses, mystics, gypsies, and any other woman suspected of having knowledge that might be called blasphemous.
New times were at hand. Europe was dominated by men. Inquisition fires burnt 8 million women at the stake that it considered evildoers or Satan's vehicles. Ancient sect that worshipped goddesses or Mother Earth would soon be crushed by martial law. All non-Christian practices soon became anti-clerical. This same church commissioned work by Leonardo. And while he willingly made it, he never forgot to spice it up with profane messages. Bold, ironic, and passionate. Through his paintbrush, saints and virgins became subtle allusions to female myths, to the sects whose followers were silenced at the stake.
Da Vinci's painting was a language he used to express everything that the official religion had forced into silence. A language destined to be understood by very few, since it could not be put into words. The message had to be cryptic, closed. It could contain just a slight suggestion, a gentle whisper of what the master Leonardo really wanted to say. The slightest slip could cause him to fall into disgrace. And he knew that, should that happen, none of his influential connections would be able to save him. Leonardo believed that where logical, masculine, and scientific thinking ceased to be, then true spiritual enlightenment, true communion with nature, the sacred, and with the feminine essence could arise.
There are a few specific keys to Leonardo's work: the search for the feminine, the absence of his two mothers, and a profound anti-dogma sentiment. The exaltation of the illegitimate, of what lies outside the law, had a personal importance which stemmed from his own history. The rejection of his father and the mandates of his family left deep scars on his soul and in his art. The labyrinth of a childhood full of shadows, combined with his own dark beliefs, are represented clearly in his pivotal piece, The Virgin and Child with St. Anne.
This piece depicts the Virgin Mary and her mother, St. Anne, with two infants. The one in the Virgin's arms is the baby Jesus. To one side, John the Baptist. Painted on cardboard, this piece has a strange and wondrous beauty. Due to the bluish hues of the figures and indefiniteness of the background, the image seems to be immersed in an aquatic, wavy atmosphere. Perhaps a memory of the beginning of the lost paradise of the maternal womb. The two figures, the two women are so combined that their silhouettes and clothing merge. The two mothers fuse in a single picture, an oval that envelops the three characters in the shape of an egg, the symbol of the seed of life and the creative force of motherhood. St. Anne's hand in the gesture of John the Baptist is striking, firm, solemn, serious. This gesture announces, indicates, warns. But in this case, the gesture of John is exaggerated, displaying an unusual determination. Disproportionate to the body of St. Anne, the hand rises up and decontextualizes the other figures, giving it a strange centrality. This hand has a certain rigidity, a certain masculinity, as if St. John the Baptist and St. Anne were a single person. Leonardo continued to litter his work with disconcerting symbols.
In this piece, Leonardo combines the two figures into one character. St. Anne with the finger of St. John the Baptist. Two figures connected by the worship of sects. All these ideas were in conflict with official Christianity. Leonardo created labyrinths, inexplicably unfinished works, composite figures in religious pieces, enigmatic smiles, changing the positions of figures, mothers, repeated gestures.
In almost all of Leonardo's religious work, John's gesture or another symbol of John are present, almost like a second signature, like a subtle wink that constantly reminds us of his true thinking, a subtle signal to his secret mates.
If we consider all of Leonardo's work and count the number of gestures of John, it becomes very clear that Leonardo belonged to a sect loyal to John the Baptist.
In The Last Supper, the character of Judas to the left, behind Jesus, is holding up the telling finger. The character seems to want to say, "Remember John the Baptist." In Adoration of the Magi, there is an imperceptible, minimal gesture of John at the center of the scene. To reaffirm the subliminal presence of John the Baptist in a scene unrelated to him, there is a magnificent and fully detailed tree that seems to be suggesting this gesture. The calm spiritual people around the tree do not worship the newborn, but rather the roots of the tree, the carob tree, a symbol of John. But this gesture is repeated, indeed, overemphasized in St. Anne and the young St. John, and then again in Bacchus. Time and again, Leonardo makes sure that we shan't forget John the Baptist.
In Leonardo's work, every sign, mark, or hidden message represents a deep feeling and strong conviction. His paintings became a vehicle for the many voices who had been silenced by blood. His work swung between the permitted and the forbidden, honor and condemnation. Where is the dividing line that puts us on one side of history or the other?
A small element that will expand swiftly will be born, and that element will have no respect for created things. Indeed, thanks to its power, it will have the ability to make all things transform their essences. Leonardo da Vinci.
Pagan or Christian, a duality that has pervaded the history of the faith. Thanks to it, people gave Christian names to their ancient gods. Likewise, in many parts of the world, people still make crosses out of salt to ward off lightning during a storm, or put an image of St. George on the back of their door to protect their houses. Due to it, we still cross ourselves when we see an owl. What is the limit of the pagan? And does this limit really exist in the human spirit?
The elegant city of Florence was so devoted to St. John the Baptist that he was named the patron saint of the city. Once again, Christian devotion and a wink to paganism were brought together. With great skill, Leonardo da Vinci waded through the murky waters that divide the unacceptable and the permissible. Since he knew perfectly well what would be unacceptable to the Church, he carried out his auspicious activities in secret. Leonardo is not known as a sculptor. Though he did conceive projects and make models that would have made magnificent sculptures, they were never carried out. In great secrecy, however, Leonardo made a sculpture with a fellow artist. Aware of the possibility that they were committing heresy, they sculpted the piece secretly. There were no witnesses, and they left no record of their creation.
What could be represented by the only sculpture that Leonardo ever made, if not John the Baptist? The sculpture is here in Florence, on the facade of none other than the Baptistery, a building dedicated to John. It's a delicate sculptural work, created during the time that Leonardo was living here. Its co-creator was Giovanni Francesco Rustici. Like Leonardo, both wise and an alchemist. He gave the sculpture the seal so characteristic of Leonardo, the gesture of John. How many knowing winks to heretical cultures can be found in art depicting Christian saints? Leonardo was constantly crossing the boundary between the Christian and the pagan. Each one of his works a step towards the heart of great mysteries. Some of these mysteries could never be revealed under any circumstances. Others were just seen as contradictory messages.
Saint John the Baptist, preacher of the desert. His name is an example of humility and spirituality. In the work of Leonardo, John the Baptist has a feminine, almost spiteful posture that differs greatly from the image of the tough prophet. Another piece by Leonardo depicts Bacchus, an ancient god from classical mythology that over time became a somewhat feminine figure. The vines recall that he is the god of wine, a festivity.
The voices of forgotten gods, silenced prayers that live on in ancient temples, unrecognizable ruins, even small rituals that we repeat without quite knowing why. In this battle between pagan and Christian symbols, the latter absorbed the former and adapted them with a determination to become the sole religion. Hence, the rituals of the Christian world echo ancient customs.
John the Baptist and Leonardo believed in communion with the hidden soul in all things. In this sense, the lives of both consisted of constant ritual.
Leonardo was born just below us in Vinci, a small town just outside Florence. For the first 5 years of his life, he was in constant contact with nature. Nourished by the Tuscan countryside, he would later echo in his work. With the surrounding hills as witnesses, his mother Caterina baptized him as was the Christian custom of the village. She gave him not only a name, but a love and affection that he would remember for the rest of his days. As the years passed, the child grew and became a brilliant artist, an inventor well ahead of his times, and a member of secret sects and societies that would defy the reigning dogma. But here, amongst these olive groves under his mother's watchful eye, the young Leonardo would gather wood for the consecrated fire to St. John the Baptist, pure and wild, like any other child.
The following documentary deals with subjects that may upset certain members in the audience, as it presents possible interpretations of historic facts. The conclusions presented here are a matter of opinion. The evidence is real. In the late 15th and early 16th century, there lived a fascinating man. An inventor, an artist, a dreamer. His unmistakable brushstroke created the most magnificent and enigmatic works of art the world has ever seen. His powerful imagination came up with astonishing inventions, pushing the creative power of man to the limit. Leonardo da Vinci, art and science, inspiration and knowledge. The result is the most unexpected irreverence, the most intimate secret expressed in his most famous work. a revelation that will ensure that we shall never see the face we thought we knew in the same way. Mona Lisa, the smile that holds a secret.
The Mona Lisa is, without a doubt, one of the greatest works in the history of Western art. How many opinions have been voiced about it? How many times has it been reproduced, counterfeited, and stolen in more than 5 centuries? There is, however, a final truth waiting to be discovered. A certainty guarded within her smile like a hidden treasure. And the search for this truth will take us to the key to Leonardo's life. A life spent searching for unobtainable perfection. A life that in 1503 encapsulated the most wondrous ambitions possible to man. To fly, crossing the sky like a bird, and an even stranger chimera, to create the perfect union of male and female within a single being. The Mona Lisa is Leonardo's greatest work. It's nothing new to call it the most famous portrait in the world. Her name has reached the greatest heights in the history of art. Her smile has inspired and educated artists throughout history, as well as immortalizing her creator as a master of his art. And yet, with one question, we can unravel any certainty we might think we possess about this work. And that question is, where is it now? The answer might seem obvious, hanging in the Louvre in Paris. But what if we were to say that this wasn't true?
The painting was created between 1503 and 1505 in Florence. The Florentine merchant Francesco del Giocondo commissioned the portrait of his third wife, Lisa Gherardini, who was 20 years his junior. They had been married a few years earlier. For Leonardo, this was not just another commission. Undertaking this portrait of Mona Lisa was, for him, a riveting experience, only rivaled by his desire to fly. An old yearning that, in those years, became an obsession.
Little by little, his dream of flying and this enormously important portrait will become the focus of his life. 2 projects that will become his greatest goals. On the one hand, to see the world from above and discover the secrets of the birds. On the other, to paint a portrait containing symbols that encapsulate the very essence of the human being. Symbols that transcend time and its limitations.
Leonardo da Vinci met Mona Lisa in 1503, the same year when he was immersed in creating his flying machine. His obsession with flying tormented him. Each time he observed the fluttering of birds, he became more and more eager to imitate them. To rise up to the sky, to look down from there at the world, was an image that had obsessed him since childhood.
He divided his time between his flying machines and Lisa's sittings. At the time, she was only 24 years old, and Leonardo was over 50. To work with her, he happily interrupted his calculations about the wind and the density of air. The two had an instant rapport. Legend has it that when the artist painted the young woman, she had just lost a child and was deeply unhappy. An ungraspable and distant sadness of the soul that the artist tried to capture and express on the canvas. It was one of the few times that he didn't interrupt one of his projects to start another.
More down to earth, Lisa's husband had hired musicians to gladden his wife's days and entertain her while the artist was at work. This was customary at the time, to relieve the ennui of posing. Leonardo da Vinci's biographers have not been able to pinpoint why the artist became so obsessed with Lisa. But there is speculation that their relationship changed the day she told him that she was 24 years old. Through the workings of a mysterious alchemy, Lisa became the reincarnation of Albiera, Leonardo's adoptive mother, with whom he had been so happy in Vinci. Albiera had passed away at 24, Lisa's age at that time.
Perhaps every time that Leonardo looked at Lisa, he saw his mother. One thing was for certain. For some reason, the artist could never be parted from that mysterious canvas. He would carry it with him until the end of his days. This opens up another issue, and one that is just the beginning in a maze of complex questions. If this was a commissioned portrait, why did Leonardo never give it to its rightful owner? Why did he keep it with him until the end of his days? There are dozens of theories, none of them completely satisfying.
Spellbound by the beauty of the painting, painters and biographers from Leonardo's time produced copious notes and sketches. The most transcendent commentaries include those of Giorgio Vasari, contemporary biographer of Da Vinci, and other Renaissance painters. 3 decades after Leonardo's death, Vasari was the first person to call the painting Mona Lisa, from Madame Lisa. The famous biographer relates that when Da Vinci left Florence, he did not take the unfinished portrait with him to the castle of Clou in France, where he ended his days. But Antonio de Beatis, who visited Leonardo in Clou in 1517, unambiguously states in his travel diary that the artist had 3 pieces with him in his final days: John the Baptist, Saint Anne, and a portrait of a mysterious Florentine lady. It has also been documented that Leonardo sold a portrait which de Beatis mentions in his travel diary for 4,000 crowns. The painting was sold to Leonardo's protector, Francis I, King of France. That is the painting that hangs today in the Louvre.
2 clearly contradictory accounts, a controversy that no one has been able to clear up. Did Leonardo take the Mona Lisa with him to France, or did he leave it unfinished here in Florence? Perhaps both things occurred. And this is where a single enigma becomes 2. Could there be 2 pieces with the same name? One lost and the other in the Louvre. Which of the 2 is the real Mona Lisa? Let's take a closer look. The description of the Mona Lisa in Vasari's biography contains specific features that do not coincide with the painting in the Louvre. Indeed, there's a tiny detail that becomes quite clear evidence: Mona Lisa's eyebrows. The biography praises the natural way Mona Lisa's eyebrows emerge from her skin in perfect harmony with her every pore. The same account mentions a powerful stare, extenuated by her eyelashes. That is to say, that her eyebrows and eyelashes are crucial to the portrait's realism. Let's take a look at the painting. Where are the eyebrows in the famous version in the Louvre?
The painting in the Louvre has neither eyebrows nor eyelashes. To explain this, some critics have tried to argue that they were erased due to poor conservation over the centuries. It is true that several layers of varnish were applied to the painting to protect it, and that it is somewhat faded. It is also true that acid was hurled on it in 1956, but only the lower half of the painting was damaged. But it is also a fact that radiological studies performed by the Louvre have determined that the painting in question has been conserved extremely well. and that there were never eyebrows or eyelashes.
The evidence becomes conclusive. Two pieces with the same name, with very different destinies. On the one hand, a faithful portrait of the young Mona Lisa, also known as Gioconda, wife of Giocondo. This unfinished portrait of a young lady with eyebrows and eyelashes stayed in Florence. On the other hand, a second painting, the famous work of a subject with no facial hair, considered one of the greatest pieces of art in history. The one that Leonardo preferred and gazed on in his final days. Two paintings, one unfinished and destined for oblivion, the other finished and hanging in the Louvre.
There is a striking sketch by the great painter Raphael de Zanzio, which proves the theory of the two portraits. Raphael visited Leonardo's studio in Florence when he was painting the Mona Lisa. Amazed by the work, he created an identical sketch. There are two differences between this drawing, which is also at the Louvre, and Leonardo's famous portrait. First, the two columns that rise up to the sides of the figure. The absence of these columns in Leonardo's work could be explained by the fact that the painting was, presumably, trimmed down in later centuries until it reached its current dimensions, 53 by 77 centimeters. The second difference, however, is more striking. The woman in Raphael's sketch has well-defined eyebrows.
Two Greek columns appear behind the lady, columns that are suspiciously absent in the Louvre version of the Mona Lisa. This is further evidence. The Mona Lisa that Leonardo painted between 1503 and 1506 does not exactly match the painting that goes by the name of Mona Lisa or Gioconda, currently hanging in the Louvre.
In Italian, Gioconda means happy woman, a phrase that could be applied to a smiling woman like the one in this famous painting. But this same term could be used as an informal way to refer to the wife of someone whose surname is Giocondo, as was the case with Mona Lisa. These two possible meanings might help to explain the inconsistencies in the historical records of Vasari and De Beatis. Vasari was referring to the painting of Giocondo's wife, whom he called Mona Lisa, a painting that stayed in Florence. De Beatis was talking about a painting of another smiling woman, a painting that Leonardo took to France and that today is in the Louvre. Indeed, the French do not call the painting that is exhibited in the Louvre Mona Lisa, but rather the Joconde or the Gioconda. This leads us to another inevitable question.
Who is portrayed in the most famous work of art in the world? The answer touches on the deepest spiritual foundations of the West and bears a transcendent and mysterious truth that leads us once again to Leonardo, the rebel, who speaks out from the silence to undermine our accepted beliefs and confront us with great truths. Let's meet the person behind the name, the Mona Lisa. Let's enter the mind of Leonardo da Vinci. Two paintings, one in the Louvre, the other missing. Two players in a game of likeness and difference, each claiming to be the real one. If the whereabouts of the original painting, inspired by Lisa and described so often by Leonardo's contemporaries, is unknown, then who is in the famous portrait hanging in the Louvre? And why has her identity been kept secret for so many years? These questions emerge from the depths of speculation and rise up to help us decipher this incredible painting that looks at us impassively from the walls of the museum. How many of Leonardo's secrets will she reveal? Leonardo had never been as busy as he was while painting this work. During this period, he was designing a canal for the River Arno, as well as drawing a series of sketches depicting the Battle of Anghieri. As an artist, he was renowned throughout Europe and was commissioned to do a great variety of work. He was at the peak of his career, the perfect age, the high point of genius and audacity. He felt he could take on any challenge.
Assignments, projects to be carried out, works of art. Leonardo was solicited and in great demand. But his mind was feverish with an idea he had been rummaging for years. Every day, he took notes on the dynamics of birds and the mechanics of the wings in relation to the wind. His next goal was related to another type of art, the art of flight. This time, his tireless measuring aimed at emulating the nature of birds.
Guided by his own obsession, Leonardo came up with thousands of sketches, full of levers and pulleys and formulas. The flying machine had become his greatest goal. The year 1503 is written in his diaries, and alongside in the margin is a phrase, perhaps a piece of advice, or a wish, or better still, a premonition.
Don't tarry further. If your bird can fly, it must do so now. This year, like others, will shortly pass. Leonardo da Vinci.
Unyieldingly, the years went by. Leonardo felt his life slipping away between projects and ideas he had yet to complete. Time raced on, and Leonardo still did not know if his flying machine would work. But one thing was for certain, he had to hurry. For the first time in his life, he wanted more than anything to finish his work and materialize his ideas.
Every night, after placing a protective cover over the portrait, Leonardo studied on for the final test, the one that would allow him to sail the skies. For him, flying was neither a heroic feat nor the solving of a puzzle. It was so much more than that. When he wrote about the flight of the great bird, his words became deep, religious, akin to the sacred. To imitate the flight of birds had become his passion because they are the only privileged beings that live between two dimensions. A portal that Leonardo had sought all his life.
But his obsession was not satisfied with that dream. His spirit asked for more. Capturing the inner sentiments of the woman in front of him became an enthralling experiment. A portrait reveals an individual's soul, and Leonardo dreamed of reflecting Mona Lisa's soul. So day after day, he divided his time between these two great obsessions. Obsessions that in the end gave his life meaning and a burning desire to realize them.
At dusk, Gioconda came to pose for her portrait. It is said that Leonardo da Vinci and Gioconda felt true affection for one another. Leonardo would tell her stories, and Mona would often laugh with him. He surrounded her with poetry, songs, and strange conversation. Meanwhile, his mind struggled to capture the harmonies expressed on that face. He observed her face, the muscles around her mouth.
Facing the contradictions about the version of the portrait hanging in the Louvre, we have to accept that the person in it is not Gioconda's wife, but someone else. Researchers who supported the idea of two versions firmly maintained that both pieces were painted by Leonardo's unmatchable hand. The two pieces may look alike, but they are different, fundamentally distinct. They portray different people, one inspired on the other. So then, if Mona Lisa is not who she's supposed to be, and there is no reliable source that can confirm her identity, then who did Leonardo paint in his most famous work? The ups and downs of this portrait throughout its history are more fitting with a detective novel than with a work of art. Perhaps more information about the piece will point us in the right direction.
Let's take a look at the painting at the Louvre. Mona Lisa's chubby hands, her manner and restful attitude have led to the assertion that she was pregnant. The full bosom, her bearing and the position of her back further support the idea that Leonardo painted a pregnant woman.
Was Mona Lisa pregnant, or had she just lost a baby? Those who deny the possibility that there can be two versions of this painting cannot begin to explain the most simple contradictions. The most famous mouth in the world seems to be asking questions that no one dares answer. When looking at the figure of Mona Lisa, it is frequently asked, for example, why is she dressed so humbly?
In the Renaissance, portraits were painted of figures with enough power and money to pay for them. Indeed, the other portraits by Vinci depict noble women and courtesans. The portrait was a document that recorded the status of the noble and evinced his power. Only those who could afford them were painted. So it was that models posed in the most costly, lavish, and arresting clothes.
It's hard to accept that Giocondo, an up-and-coming bourgeois merchant, would allow his wife to be eternalized like a poor woman. And yet the sublimeness of Gioconda's face, her gaze, her famous smile, the serenity of her hands, all contrast with the clothes she's wearing. Isn't this further evidence jumping out at us? And if this is not her portrait, the answer is bold but sure. The most famous portrait in the world is not a portrait, or rather, it is a portrait of Leonardo da Vinci, a self-portrait.
Various investigations have determined the astounding likeness between Gioconda's most significant features and those of the self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci. Minute studies of the lines of the face, the expression and the features have been carried out, comparing each brushstroke, each line, each wrinkle, the dark angles, and the twinkle in the eyes of these two works. And links have been found between them.
It's common to assert that artists always speak of themselves and their concerns. They find their inspirations in the threads that tightly bind their work with their sensibilities and the search for their true selves. Hence, the most important portrait in history, the most famous image in the world, is a self-portrait of Leonardo da Vinci.
The self-portrait theory is one possible explanation. Another explanation that would account for the shabby clothes and the fact that a portrait so resembles Leonardo would be that the painting depicts the artist's biological mother, Caterina. But there is a third theory, one compatible with the other two, the theory of the hermaphrodite. According to this theory, in the Gioconda, Leonardo did not only combine the image of his mother with his own image, but also produced a perfect synthesis of the male and female, the result of the search for androgynous perfection posed by all the writings of the day, the representation of the importance of woman in the life of man and the feminine origin of all things, a belief that went back to the most ancient rites, the Gnostics, fertility and Mother Earth, beliefs that, thanks to numerous indications in other pieces, we can attribute to Leonardo. A dangerous position to uphold.
Imagine what would have happened had the Church understood this act of defiance. It would have undoubtedly been seen as heresy, or at the very least, a scandal. Changing sexes, even in a work of art, has been difficult to accept throughout the ages, especially when the work in question is as famous and prestigious as this one is. It would have been logical to try and hide it, to cover it up, with thousands of versions, rumours, and conflicting information. This theory leads us to further questions and hidden messages. Before us is an interpretation of sexuality that opens up a new vision of history and formulates a revolutionary, if ancient, theory of the sexes, a theory in total conflict with Christian dogma and Western values. What esoteric messages are hidden within this self-portrait? In this piece, like in his other works, Leonardo hides symbols, but in none of his other works does he go quite so far. The sacred exaltation of sexual union, the divine superiority of the third sex. Despite his spirituality, it's said that Leonardo's habits were not very Christian. He didn't go to Mass, he worked on Sunday, and wrote incomprehensible chemical formulas and aphorisms. He often referred to Jesus as a man who died in the East, and laughed at the cult of the Virgin. The only order he considered divine was natural order, and respected laws that imitated nature. These thoughts and actions made him a sinner in the eyes of the Church. Furthermore, his eccentricities gave him a decidedly demonic air. He dug up graves. He wrote his diary backwards, and he sought an elixir to fool God and hold off death.
If Leonardo da Vinci was indeed a Grand Master of the Priory of Sion, a secret society whose origins lay with the Knights Templar, and whose mission was to protect the supposed lineage of Jesus and Mary Magdalene, and therefore reaffirm the central role of women in the Church that so oppressed them at the time, he must have had many reasons to express secrets, encoded messages, passwords that could not be found out easily. His writings and diagrams are riddled with incomprehensible messages, anagrams, and other sorts of language that could only be understood by initiates.
Cryptic messages, anagrams, puzzles, cryptograms, hidden messages put together so that only the right people could understand them. Being found out could mean torture, the stake, death. Choosing the wrong messenger, or one who might suspect that he's carrying important information, was also risky. How was it possible to protect important information and at the same time send out hidden messages? How to make them go unnoticed?
Leonardo used anagrams in his writings. His diary and notes are full of allegorical aphorisms, anagrams, and puns. This has led to the belief that Leonardo used the same methods of codification in his most famous portrait. Carried away by their imaginations, some have even ventured to suggest that the name Mona Lisa also holds a heretical message encoded in an anagram, since it is possible to form two strange combinations with the words Mona Lisa. The first theory is that Mona Lisa is an anagram for Ammon and Lissi, the ancient way of writing Isis, Egyptian gods of the male and the female. Thus, the name of the painting would indicate Leonardo's pro-androgyny position. The other theory is that Mona Lisa is an anagram based on the words sun and soul in Latin, which are the basic components in alchemy's primary transmutation from sun, gold, and soul, silver, to mercury, once again uniting the male and the female. Both theories have two insurmountable flaws, however. First, Leonardo did not name the painting Mona Lisa in his lifetime. His biographer Vasari gave it that name 3 decades after his death. Second, the correct spelling in Italian is Mona Lisa with 2 N's, a fact which completely destroys any anagram that uses just one N.
To communicate his most important messages, his most forbidden symbols, Leonardo used an ingenious technique. He left them for all to see. They were so visible that for centuries they went unnoticed by the censors.
No one knew at that time of this second piece's existence. The other commissions that he received would have to wait. Like the one from the Duchess of Mantua, who for 15 years had been begging Leonardo to paint a portrait. He preferred to spend his time with the merchant's wife.
The merchant's wife's familiar smile inspired Leonardo. He could not say what it was exactly that enraptured him, but her presence was like a halo that enveloped him as if in a dream. A dream that immersed him in the idea that somehow, through Lisa, he would find Albiera again. Perhaps love is all that childhood leaves us with.
Let's imagine the Vinci countryside during harvest. The small son frolics in his cradle, watched over by his mother, who's working nearby. Leonardo himself used to tell this story. A large bird came to flutter over his cradle, blocking the sun. Later, it perched on the cradle's edge, and with his tail feathers, it began to tickle the baby's lips. When the agitated adults arrived, the child was laughing in delight. The young Leonardo, a friend of the birds.
A dream? A childhood memory? Leonardo did not know for sure. Birds were always on his mind. But the setting he remembered was real, very real. Vinci, the town where he grew up. A hill surrounded by valleys overlooking the River Arno. The shimmering blue sky against a cluster of houses suspended above a valley. There, where the birds welcomed him to the world and bestowed him with the first of a long series of questions. How is it possible to fly?
If I can fly, I will be known all over the world and forever remembered. People will look up and gaze at a man with wings. Leonardo da Vinci.
There is a striking but little-known illustration of Leonardo's, a drawing at the Le Mans Museum in France. It was made in 1460, when the artist was only 8 years old. Almost prophetically, the picture shows a young Jesus playing with a kind of toy helicopter, a mechanical bird with a propeller. Is this a natural drawing for an 8-year-old boy who lives in a time when they didn't even know that the world was round? What other visions of the future did the young Leonardo have? And who could understand these visions?
Luckily, after many frustrated attempts, it seemed that the flying project was on its way. It did not simply entail copying the wings of a bird. After years of study, he had obtained key knowledge on how the center of gravity and air resistance in a falling body interrelated. He was so much aware of these maneuvers as if he himself had the body of a bird.
When Leonardo returned from his thoughts, he dived into the mazes of the Mona Lisa's soul, searching for an image. For him, this was a similar obsession, trying to express for eternity the face that would convey the mysteries of the soul. Who was Leonardo? Perhaps he hoped that by leaving enigmas and tracks, someone, someday, would understand his true nature.
The great bird will take its first flight from Mount Cecere, which will fill the universe with amazement. Leonardo da Vinci.
Perhaps this androgynous portrait, known as the Mona Lisa, is so transcendent because it brings together so many of its creators, concerns and obsessions.
Perhaps the theory that Leonardo belonged to secret societies that defended the divinity of women in the Christian church is true. Or perhaps the painting is a portrait of Caterina, his biological mother. Or maybe it is even a self-portrait, or a combination of these three things. One thing is for certain. With sincerity and dedication, Leonardo was searching for his inner self, and he expressed himself as an artist. Before the whole world, he bared his most intimate yearnings and greatest fears. While he freed his body through the search for flight, he freed his soul by painting his true self. An androgynous being split in two. Half a being who longed for its other half and other sex. The most ancient being. The one who gave rise to all things. The complete one. Mother and father. Son and daughter. Leonardo probably loved Lisa del Giocondo. His love was platonic and ideal. But it was in the other painting, the one we know, where Leonardo projected himself. And he gave it the most beautiful smile in history. The smile that says everything in silence. The smile that transcends even the name of Leonardo, the universal artist. The Mona Lisa smile. From the movement of sea waves or birds in flight, I draw the movement of a smile. Leonardo da Vinci. The world's most famous smile. The effect is a painting whose manifest calm generates uncommon tension. Leonardo knew how two bodies of water would behave when meeting, or the movements of a bird when soaring between two gusts of wind. Even how two muscles in the body become one. In the painting of the smiling woman, we find a face that captures the precise moment when two emotions come together. Time and space, sadness and joy.
We will never know if Leonardo was able to realize his dream and fly. But in his work, he most certainly discovered a flying machine that did indeed take flight. His work has soared through time and human imaginations and become a part of our universal heritage. Thus, with this self-portrait, Leonardo did what no one else was able to. He secretly transcended with a universally famous image that still leaves us with the uneasy feeling we've not understood everything. An unfathomable and classic image, just like the face of its creator.
At the age of 50, Leonardo had lived what might have taken others several lifetimes to experience. Military engineer, architect, lively host, forensic scientist, traveler. Imagining his life requires thankless but necessary definitions, because from Leonardo, one might expect any experience, thought or achievement. As we have proven, the deepest esoteric mysteries echoed in his art, yet he kept very few pieces. Gioconda was certainly one of them. Perhaps his ideas about reincarnation and his admiration of Buddhism are also in this work. Anything is possible when it comes to Leonardo. His imagination knew no bounds, and the Gioconda was, perhaps, his greatest achievement.
The Gioconda, here in the Louvre, encapsulates Leonardo's dream, the perfection of his existence. In the image in front of him on the canvas, the man of the unfinished works discovered the complement that he was missing. But what could have happened to the portrait of Lisa?
Due to the number of activities and commissions he had taken on in those years, Lisa told him she did not think he would finish her portrait. Unfazed, Leonardo defended it. For him, the painting was rest from his mathematical work, and he was certain that he would finish it. But months went by, and Leonardo did not complete the painting. Lisa would repeat time and again, but the painter would never finish it.
Lisa was right. Leonardo never finished the work, and it was left, lost in some corner of Europe. Perhaps the annoyed client decided to take it as it was, and it ended up being devoured by time in the corner of some palace. However, the portrait that is on display in the Louvre, the Gioconda, the smiling woman, is perfect and finished. We simply have to assume that it is not the portrait of Lisa. There were two parallel paintings, one that was lost, and the other that expresses the soul of its creator, his spiritual synthesis. Today, 5 centuries later, that painting hangs in the famous museum.